I know I can speak on behalf of everybody at the Hill to say how thrilled we are to be here in Minneapolis. Thank you for joining us for the first installment of the Building the Dream series. Minneapolis will be our first stop on a 3-cities tour, and we can't think of a better place to kick things off. Before we begin, I would like to take a moment to thank our sponsors, the National Association of Home Builders, for their sponsor of this morning's event. We can't thank you enough for your partnership and support. The Minneapolis-St. Paul metro area is thriving, but as people flock to the Twin Cities in search of economic opportunities and urban living, a shortage of affordable housing is pricing residents out of the possibility of owning a home and driving up the cost of rent. As leaders across the country search for forward-looking solutions to tackle these housing inequalities in their own backyards, many are looking to Minneapolis's 2040 plan, which makes Minneapolis the first major U.S. city to end single-family zoning as an ambitious solution towards a future of more equitable housing access. We're going to be hearing from state legislators, city officials, local housing experts, and community leaders this morning as we explore Minneapolis's housing inequalities and lay out a path forward for the city's housing market. Before we get started, a few quick housekeeping notes. In addition to our audience here at the Lumber Exchange, we are also live streaming on thehill.com, as well as the Hill's Facebook page. Please keep your phones on silent throughout the duration of the program. However, we definitely encourage you to engage in the conversation on social media. You can follow us on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and LinkedIn at The Hill Events, and join us in the conversation using the hashtag #TheHillBuildingTheDream. We'll be taking questions from the audience throughout the duration of the program, so please be on the lookout for members with the handheld mics. Finally, you'll receive an electronic survey at the end of the program. We are always eager to hear how we can make our events more dynamic, and I encourage you to take a few moments to provide your feedback on today's program. With that, let's dive in. Please join me in welcoming Minority Leader Kurt Daudt. Mr. Daudt currently serves as Minority Leader of the Minnesota House of Representatives, where he is a representative of the constituents of District 31A.
Well, thank you, Leader Daudt, for being here. I wanted to start with sort of putting this housing crisis in context. We talk a lot about this in cities like Seattle and cities like San Francisco or Los Angeles or Washington, D.C., but we don't hear a lot about the Midwestern metros. So tell me about the situation in Minneapolis.
Sure. First of all, thank you for inviting me to be here and participate. It's an interesting issue, and it's something that's really important. We have, and I brought some statistics I want to run through quickly too to kind of demonstrate how important this issue is. I think we've taken a lot of really good steps from a public policy perspective to make some incremental change in the right direction, to make housing more affordable and to make, frankly, housing more accessible for more people. But we have a long ways to go, and I think the statistics, forgive me for using notes, but the statistics I think really tell a very interesting story. Right now in Minnesota, we have the worst homeownership inventory in the U.S. We're 51st if you include the District of Columbia. We have very few options for first-time home buyers, workforce buyers, immigrant community, and I think this should be something that tells us we absolutely have to do better. We're 41st worst in rental inventory in the country, and we're 48th in the home ownership equity gap. So while we've taken steps from a public policy perspective, I think an area where we really need to focus on, and during my 4 years as Speaker of the House, we did take some steps in the right direction to reduce the cost of new construction. But I think that's one of the biggest barriers. I've got statistics here about what it costs to actually build a home here compared to other cities, and the numbers are staggering. And it's because of kind of bureaucratic hoops that we make people jump through to actually build homes. I think the steps that have been taken in Minneapolis to change the zoning to allow for multi-unit structures all across the city, I think will be helpful in increasing the inventory. But the permitting costs and all of the things associated with building a new home make it really unaffordable. Now, we don't have the land costs that they do on the coasts, but we are the highest cost of home building between the coasts in the entire country. Cost of medium, building a new home, we're the highest in the country between the coasts, and I think those numbers are shocking. The same home by the same builder in Lakeville, Minnesota, if you built that same home in Wisconsin, it's $60,000 less, same floor plan, same builder, If you built that same home in Chicago, it's $85,000 less, and if you built that same home in Indianapolis, it's $130,000 less. Now that's obviously a higher end home, but it demonstrates the fact that we through our bureaucratic hoops have made it really expensive to build homes in this state.
Mm-hmm. And what are we going to see out of the legislature? As you set your priorities for next year, I mean, Minnesota is the only divided legislature in the country. As you set your priorities next year, is housing an area of bipartisan consensus?
I think that it is, and I give props to Governor Dayton and Governor Walz for recognizing this. I think everybody on a bipartisan basis understands that the cost of home ownership is a real crisis in our state. They've created committees and blue ribbon commissions to deal with this, and I think we really need to utilize those avenues as a way of kind of bringing forward these issues and really dealing with them. And I think we really have to have the goal of not only trying to change our zoning policies to promote building of the type of housing that we need for people, and we have a huge workforce housing issue out in greater Minnesota as well, but we also need to address the cost of what it costs to build a home, because I think we've got a long ways to go, and I think our policies actually kind of give us the opposite result that we want. I think we're encouraging people either not to build the type of housing that we want because of those costs, or we're encouraging them to build elsewhere. There's statistics about the cost of land. If we really want kind of more dense construction in our metro areas, the cost of land is the issue. I think it's Prior Lake, a lot in that particular city, or maybe a 1 acre parcel in that particular city can be $120,000. You get outside of the city, it's $21,000 an acre in Credit River Township, which is literally just a stone's throw. So we're encouraging people not to build in the cities, but to build outside. And so while we talk about having public policy to have more dense development in our cities, our market is actually encouraging the opposite. So, we need to wrap our head around those things and try to come up with public policy to change that. But my focus in the next legislative session, as it has been in the last few, will be to actually reduce some of those bureaucratic hoops that people have to jump through to build a home, and try to reduce and take some of the cost out of building a new home in this state.
Are there specific types of regulations that you'd like to see reduced?
Well, for instance, in other cities, if you have to get water or environmental permits, it's one permit in one agency. In this state, it's 5 agencies, and they each require a permit, and they each require engineering. That's an example of duplicity that we just simply don't need. But I suppose in the way that government operates, these agencies for self-preservation have lobbied to keep their agency with their finger in the pie, trying to get a piece of the action. But the reality is that doesn't promote the building of the kind of, and at the pace that we need for new home ownership to be where we want it to be.
Mm-hmm. What are the root causes of this? It sounds like there's a combination of government inertia coupled with a broader problem of a growing population that wants more out of fewer units.
I think we haven't really, I'm going to talk from a legislative standpoint, and I don't mean to speak for the cities or for the Met Council, but I think we haven't come up with a real comprehensive plan for dealing with all of these things. I think we saw bills in the last session introduced that basically would not allow a landlord to do a background check on a tenant. Well, what's the end result of that going to be? Now, while it may sound like we're really, from the heart's perspective, it may sound like we're really giving people an opportunity to own a home or not own a home, but rent a home who may not have been able to otherwise, or may have been rejected unfairly. But the reality is that's a very small percentage of people. And if landlords now decide, I'm not going to take the chance on renting to somebody that may trash my unit and damage it without the appropriate deposit or whatever, and they pull that rental unit off the market, we've made it more difficult. And I already gave you a statistic that we're 51st worst rental inventory in the country. a policy like that, I think, will make the problem worse. So while it might feel good to your heart, our brain should tell us that this is going to give us the opposite result that we want.
You touched a little bit on the differences in prices between cities and suburbs and ex-urban areas, and the urban-rural divide is really dominating our politics right now. How does that play out? What are those tensions like in housing policy?
Well, that's a good question. I come from a rural area. I represent a district that's an hour north of the Twin Cities. I've been a little critical recently of our mayor, who I think is coming today, about the public safety aspect of the city. We've had some really high crime rates or high instances of very visible crimes during broad daylight, which we think prevents people from my district from coming in or dissuades them from coming in and participating in the economy of Minneapolis and St. Paul. I think from a housing perspective, it's also somewhat true. I think there's a competition for the dollars for workforce housing and for low-income housing. Some of our rural communities are struggling to keep and attract businesses because we don't have the workforce housing necessary to house the employees that would be required. And there is a competition that sets up. So when you have this urban-rural divide, in the legislature, just kind of generally that you see, and it's happening here just like it's happening all around the country, those sorts of issues kind of magnify that as well. But the housing issue is not just an issue for the metro area. But I think we as a state need to come together as a legislature and come up with our own plan of where we want to see development, where we want to see that sort of growth. Obviously, we have the infrastructure in the metro areas to grow further, but the problem is I think a lot of our policies are kind of almost encouraging a sprawl, and I think those are the sorts of issues we need to talk about.
Yeah, the balance there between the $120,000 for an acre in one place and $21,000 for the other, that does seem to encourage sprawl. Is sprawl by necessity a bad thing?
Not necessarily. There are people that certainly want to have an acre or two or three and live in a semi-rural area. I see that in my area a lot. We also have people that, will buy a 2 or 3 or 4 acre parcel and they want to have a horse ranch on it. I think we need to really, in rural areas, we talk about those issues frequently, but I think the Met Council is trying to deal with some of this stuff, but I think unfortunately the policies sometimes aren't consistent with what I think we want the outcome to be, because I think we're thinking with our hearts instead of our brains, and we're doing a lot of things that have made building a home and owning a home more expensive, and the more expensive we make it, the more out of reach it is for more Minnesotans, and our goal should be the exact opposite of that. I really hate to read these statistics and how expensive it is to build a home here in Minnesota, and it's not just the land values. Yes, that's a part of it, but the land values in Chicago are certainly as high as they are here. This really is the bureaucratic cost of the hoops that we make people jump through to build a new home in this state. And
what kind of impacts does that have? You mentioned working class families and immigrant families especially. I mean, what does that do to the people who are striving for that American dream?
Well, I think everybody, I shouldn't say everybody, but I think the statistic is probably around 90% of Minnesotans want to own a home. And we need to make that as accessible as possible so that everybody can participate in that. I mean, home ownership is a phenomenal thing for a community, for safety of a community, for stability of a family, and really for a family even to build equity and to build some wealth. A home is a great opportunity to do that through rising appreciation. So I think we need to do everything we can to really strive to make that happen. When people don't have access to it, you see this kind of divide getting greater. We have one of the largest achievement gaps in the country, which means our low income and minority students aren't getting the same level of education as our middle income students. The further that divide, just in everything, in education, in housing, the further that divide is, I feel like the longer term it is, and the more difficult it is for us to overcome that. So we need to narrow that divide in every one of those places as much as we can.
Mm-hmm. You talked too about the rental availability here in the city and in the state. In the past, I mean, government has played a role in subsidizing new home construction and subsidizing big developers and addressing that inventory shortage. Does government still have a role to play in that?
You know, I think so. I think we probably have to. I prefer to see that role as minimal as possible and let the market, kind of solve some of those problems. But we have artificially raised the market by making people jump through so many expensive hoops to build a home in this state. I heard a statistic recently that to just the last revision of the building code added $7,000 average to the cost of building a new home. Just the last revision added $7,000 to the cost. And it's stupid things like if you have an unfinished basement, they make you sheetrock the ceiling now as part of the building code. And by the way, if you want to finish that basement in the future, you have to rip that sheetrock out. And then where does that sheetrock go? I mean, it's just it's illogical. And so those are the sorts of things that we really, I think, need to address. We had a pretty high visibility battle here with our governor recently over putting sprinklers into a private home. The courts eventually threw that out. The governor was going to do it, the previous governor, not the current one, was going to do it through rulemaking and revising the building code to require homes over a certain square footage to have sprinkler systems, which doesn't add it adds a cost to a home when the data doesn't really show that's a problem. But the reality was special interest groups show up at the Capitol and they lobby. In that case, it was plumbers. They wanted the extra work of putting sprinkler systems in every home. Can you blame them? No, but should we let that drive our public policy, or should we let the fact that we want to strive to have a higher rate of home ownership and have more people owning homes in this state, should that drive our public policy? And I think the answer is really clear. Now, common sense won out on that one, but the courts had to step in to make that happen. But it's one small example.
Yeah. Let's turn to the audience now. Questions? Anybody here? Yes, ma'am, right over here. Do we have a microphone, or you can just shout, please? Oh, I guess we do have a microphone.
Millions of people watch. You talk about homeownership around new homes. Is there going to be a policy to save our beautiful older homes, not tear those down and put them in a landfill somewhere? Those are the affordable homes that new home buyers can get into, not the new homes. Okay?
What do you think?
Well, I hope so. I mean, we certainly want to see that, but the reality is, we're 51st. If you include DC in home ownership inventory. That's not new homes, that's not just exclusively new home construction, that's all homes. The reality is we just don't have enough homes. I think when you bring new stuff on, it's the existing inventory, the older homes that become the more affordable ones. But you need to have, and I've been talking a lot about new homes, you need to have those new homes come on to increase the number in the inventory so that people can step up maybe from an older home into a newer home at a higher price point, but then that vacates that older home and makes that available in the marketplace for somebody to get in at a more affordable rate. So I hope so. I hope that, and I think that's something you have to think about too with this new 2040 plan and what the city of Minneapolis has done changing and whether the public policy drives the outcome that we actually want or creates the outcome that we want. If you've changed the policy so that every lot now in the city of Minneapolis can be a multi-family home instead of just a single family home, is that going to do the opposite of what you just said, which I think is important, to have those older homes at an affordable level for people to get in as a first-time home buyer? Is that going to cause the market to tear down those older homes and build a duplex or a triplex or a quad on that lot because a homeowner, a landowner now, a landlord can create some additional revenue by having multi-units to rent on that? So those are the sorts of things we need to think about, the cause and effect of the decisions that we make in public policy. But I agree with you. I think those older homes are absolutely necessary.
I got time for one more. Anybody else?
Sorry, I talk too much. So.
It's all right. We like that.
Hi. Well, you talked about the Met Council a lot, and I was gonna. I know the area median income for this area, according to the Met Council, for affordable housing is that 60% of the area median income is generally the rule. But according to the Met Council, the area median income is $92,000, and that's for a family of 4, and that's their only. So 60% of that area median income, even a Minneapolis school teacher could not afford something affordable.
Yeah.
So that area median income, it's factoring extremely wealthy people as well as everybody. So in my eyes, that figure is really rigged. And if developers or even the city or the Met Council thinks that that's a rule for affordable housing, it's really not the rule. And that's, I think, a big problem why we have this jam.
Thanks. Yeah. More of a comment than a question. I don't disagree with you. I think, that is an issue, but, from a policymaker's perspective, we need to just think about, from an affordability standpoint, are the homes in Minneapolis too expensive, whether it be a new home or whether we've put a policy in place that kind of encourages a landowner to tear down an existing home, which might be more affordable, and put up a duplex or more. And what we're finding is that people are moving further and further out into the suburbs to get the sort of home that they can afford. I come from an area in the state where I really think is the best example almost in the country of the boom and the bust of the recession that we went through in, I'll say 2008, kind of the housing bubble. I was an Isanti County Commissioner prior to being in the legislature. Isanti County is the next county north of the 7-county metro area. We were at times the fastest growing county in the country prior to the recession, which means we had literally the highest, on a percentage basis, level of new home starts and those sorts of things. When the recession hits, we had the highest level of foreclosures, we really didn't see any new home construction for almost a decade to speak of. And so it really was the best example of a boom and a bust. And I think in addition to just the recession, one of the things that caused that is folks that live in my area. I'm a bedroom community. We're 45 minutes north of the metro area. And many of, I say, conservatively 100% of the people commute into the metro area to work. I'm joking, but it's not quite that high, but almost. And what happened too at that time was gas prices went to $4, from $2 a gallon to $4 a gallon, if you remember that. So when somebody had a budget of, $500 a month for gas, all of a sudden now it was $1,000 a month for gas to get to their job. And now they were having to make decisions. Do I put gas in my car today to get to my job, or do I pay my mortgage? And we saw the foreclosure rate go through the roof. So are we encouraging people through our home prices here in Minneapolis and the immediate kind of surrounding metro area, because we've made them so high through a lot of reasons, not just land costs, are we encouraging people to move out further and encouraging that urban sprawl? And did we kind of make that problem worse than it needed to be? I think the answer to that is yes, but it should be a really great lesson for us to learn.
All right, Minority Leader Kurt Daudt, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you all. Thank you.